Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for joining us tonight here at the Leak Project. We have presidential candidate, futurist, author, philosopher, and all-around cool guy, Zoltan Istvan. Tonight we're going to be discussing the transhuman movement and what many people consider the Holy Grail, not the one discussed in the Holy Bible, but the technological Holy Grail of physical immortality. Recently traveling the country in the Immortality Bus and delivering the Transhuman Bill of Rights to D.C., author of Transhuman Wager, Mr. Istvan, is on the cutting edge of eternal life. Check out his work and recent bus tour at www.immortalitybus.com. Zoltan, thank you very much for joining us tonight here at the Leak Project. How are you doing?
I'm doing great. Thanks for having me.
Hey, it's great to have you. I know you're a super busy guy. You got a lot of stuff on your plate, so just really honored to have you on our show, and we're going to get as much info as we can here in this hour. I'm going to pick the heck out of your brain, so just really appreciate you spending some time with us. Now, if you could just real quick tell our listeners a little bit about yourself and what led you down the path of the transhuman movement.
Well, I'm a futurist. I'm a journalist by trade. I used to work for the National Geographic Channel for about 4 or 5 years, and I have always been interested in science and technology. And while covering a story in Vietnam, I had a kind of a real close call with a landmine, and it really got me thinking about what it meant to die and if there was a way around death. And transhumanism is the social movement of a couple million people that are trying to do something about overcoming death through science and technology. But it's not just about overcoming death. It's also about becoming sort of empowered through technology, robotic arms, uploading your mind into a machine, and having a tremendous amount more intellectual capacity. Even things like becoming a fish, through genetic editing and stuff like that, breathing underwater. So transhumanism is something that's really very radical science technology. And I became very attracted to transhumanism after I had this kind of near-death experience in Vietnam with the National Geographic Channel. And I've been promoting it ever since. It's been about 5 or 6 years now. And I'm also, I suppose, as maybe some of your listeners know, of course, I'm the presidential candidate for the Transhumanist Party in 2016.
Well, and how cool is that? I mean, that's awesome. And I want to ask you here in a few minutes about that and the Bill of Rights, the Bill of Rights that you actually had the opportunity to hand off in D.C., the Transhuman Bill of Rights. That's incredible, too. So, it's interesting, too, because you see people out there now that had their legs amputated, and some of the new stuff out there is really impressive. Some of the stuff that they've got connected to their body. And I used to be, I'll be totally honest with you, I used to be freaked out by the transhuman movement because I thought that it was, this way to plug everybody into the Borg and have complete control at some level and just be part of this hive mind. The more that I've researched it, it actually fascinates me now more than ever because I do see the different possibilities, and I think that with anything there can be good or bad. It just depends on what you're going to do with it. So, if we could, let's talk about some of the technologies that you've had the opportunity to see and work with that is going to lead towards the possibility of physical immortality.
Sure. And, I speak about immortality a lot. That's kind of one of my main things that I like to promote. A lot of transhumanists would say, well, maybe living forever isn't, or living indefinitely is not really what their version of transhumanism is. Their version is just living better. And, especially if you're, for example, like an amputee, war veterans have had a huge, tremendous benefit from transhumanist technology. They can have their arm blown off or their leg blown off and come back to the States and, or to the, most parts of the world now, and have a bionic amputee, a limb put onto their body that ties to their neural system, so they can go and grab a beer, or they can go and write with a pen, or they can do almost most of the normal things they would have done before they had lost their limb. That's kind of classic transhumanist technology, and I often like to start with that because it's really, transhumanist technology is really dramatically helping war veterans as well as the disabled community. Exoskeleton technology is one of the most important transhumanist technologies, in my opinion. And it's literally going to make the wheelchair go extinct probably over the next 5 and 10 years or 15 years. But it would be very surprising to me if anyone chooses to remain in a wheelchair, for example, if they're a paraplegic, quadriplegic, because we have technology that's going to put on this robotic suit, and now you can run, now you can jump. In fact, it might even allow you to climb Mount Everest. And I've gone on the record saying that exoskeleton technology is going to allow a person in a wheelchair to run faster than the fastest runner on the planet in probably about 10 years. That's how fast that technology is growing. But some of the other technologies is, for example, I have a little tiny chip inside my hand, and it allows you to do little things like start your car without a key or bypass various security systems. And there's now an upgraded chip. I don't have it yet, that allows you to pay at Starbucks, or go on to an airplane, and you can bypass security checks because it's all built into your little chip, and the chip is only the size of a grain of rice. There are security issues with it. There are, of course, surveillance issues with it. But slowly human beings are merging with this technology and including it in their bodies, and that's sort of really what transhumanism is about. I think for a huge amount of people. For me, of course, a lot of it is really about trying to use that technology. Like, a third of human beings die from heart disease. Well, there are companies out there that are working on a robotic heart. If we can replace the heart, the biological heart, with a robotic one, we could save a third of the world. So those are some of the more important transhumanist technologies to myself.
And also, do you think that as time goes on, the nanotechnologies, are just getting more amazing on a weekly basis, and they get chips smaller and smaller, and there might be some type of infusion with biotechnology and nanotechnology. So what we might think of an exosuit 10 years from now really could be something that they could plug into your nervous system, and it would be nanotype technology working from the inside.
Oh, yeah, yeah. I mean, the nano revolution is just going to change everything because, for example, I was just speaking today about this to somebody. One of the biggest problems is we actually have the ability to cure a lot of diseases, but we don't catch them in time. Cancer is one of those things where it's really, if you catch it in time, you have a very strong chance of surviving. But if you don't, you can die. But if you have these nanobots inside your body, you're going to catch cancer within the first few days of it occurring, rather than a year later, and then you have to go through chemo and all these other things. And of course, if you can catch it in its very early stages, the treatments are negligible. So, that's kind of one of the revolutions that this nanotechnology is going to do. Is, and also with heart attacks, it'll say, wow, some of your arteries and veins are plugged. That's why it's not pumping that well here. We have the little tiny scanners on these nanobots inside you. So I'm a big believer in that technology. It's about 10 years out. And unfortunately, they're still not really able to experiment with it because it is so futuristic, but everything is getting smaller, and getting smaller is the real key to a lot of this transhumanist innovation, because the smaller you can get, the less power it uses, and the more you can make these things do. And eventually, we'll, like bacteria, we're just going to have a ton of little robots inside us that are monitoring the well-being of our health.
Yeah, I mean, that's a very fascinating thought indeed. And the chip that you had put in your hand there, obviously, it can do a lot of good things for you, a lot of convenience. I had an opportunity to talk with a gentleman that's really good with cybersecurity. He worked with NSA a while back. His name's Charles Smith. And we talked about the chips, the microchipping of society, and the benefits, the pros and the cons. And he said one of the things that made him nervous is those type of chips can be spoofed to where they could make it look like you were actually on the other side of the country when in reality you could be in your own living room.
Well, so right now the chips are basically just RFID chips. So they're not like computer chips per se. What you do is you send software into them and they bounce it back. So it's kind of like a radar device, or a bounce back device. Eventually, though, they're going to be much more sophisticated than that. And of course, hacking is going to be the biggest problem. A lot of people don't know this, but Dick Cheney, the former vice president, had a heart pump, essentially in one of his valves, and it was Wi-Fi enabled, and he was constantly freaked out about it being hacked while he was giving speeches in public. And forgive me a little, I'm a little under the weather because I was skiing with my kids, but Dick Cheney was constantly worried about the Wi-Fi being hacked, and so every time he went to give a public speech, he had that Wi-Fi turned off. And I think there's going to be a big field like that happening, where people will have this stuff in them or near them, but they'll be able to very easily turn it off in times that get sketchy. Like if you enter a public space where there's too much, sometimes, for example, you go to Starbucks and you already change your internet settings because you're a little bit worried about, stuff like that. So I think there'll be different things like that that come out that make people feel more secure.
Yeah, and with anything else, if you've got a cell phone, that could be spoofed too. So they could do the same thing with that, or with your driver's license if there's a chip in your driver's license. So, and it seems to me like the technologies are just becoming more incredible every day. So, like when you did that tour, Zoltan, what were some of the highlights when you had the opportunity to go across the country? I mean, I know you met some really cool people and went to some really fun places.
Yeah, so for your viewers who don't know, I drove a 40-foot coffin across the country. As crazy as that sounds, and it was wacky. I'm a third-party presidential candidate. We got to do things that get attention. That's really the only way to make this work in America. Is we don't have much money, we don't have that much support, so we got to do things that grab the attention of the media. And that 40-foot coffin was a pretty good symbol for what the transhumanist movement is trying to do, trying to make it so that the American people do not end up in a coffin. Through life extension and through the longevity technologies that we support. So anywhere we drove in our 40-foot coffin, everyone stops and everyone looks and everyone wonders, this is something I've never seen before. And that was a great way to start a conversation. You would show up at a diner in the middle of nowhere, let's say Texas, and people would come out and look at it, and people would come out and talk to you. And, the reception was pretty good. Not everyone was thrilled when everyone kind of figured out, oh, wow, these are transhumanists. Or in my case, and basically an atheist presidential candidate as well. So that kind of got into some people's nerves.
You're
But
not
still,
going to do
most
real
people,
good in the Bible Belt.
of course, of course. But that said, we actually did do pretty good in terms of, I'm not out to win because I have no chance of winning. What I'm out to do is to spread a very pro techno optimistic culture. And it can be atheistic and it can be religious. It doesn't, for me, it's not really, transhumanism is not really necessarily one or the other. It's really just about let's use the technology to make our lives better. And my main platform, and really the main platform, of course, of the bus too, is we're spending a ton of money on the military. We're spending a ton of money fighting wars in like far off places. Why not spend wars fighting cancer? Why not? I mean, why not spend money fighting cancer? Why not spend money fighting heart disease? Why not give that money to the people's health, like directly to their health, not necessarily to this kind of quasi idea of safety and defense? So when I tell people that across the nation, I think generally everyone agrees, because who doesn't want to have cancer wiped out? Who doesn't want to have, diabetes or Alzheimer's, completely removed off the face of the planet? These are things that I think everyone wants. So even in the Deep South, regardless whether I was chipped and they thought it was the mark of the beast, or regardless whether
I'm
they
glad you brought
thought
that up.
they thought I was a little bit wacky, they still agreed with the main premise, which is the government should be spending a lot more money on the health of its citizens than it does on, bombs in Afghanistan and stuff like that, that most places none of us will ever actually go.
Right. And, the people that were, in Afghanistan, the U.S. military, et cetera, like my brother fought over there, and it was really tough on him, being exposed to all the depleted uranium, the way that it messed with his head. And I really like what you're saying. And what I find fascinating is people that, because of a religious preference, will vote for somebody, even though their actions are war when they say they're for peace. And yet somebody like yourself, that just because of your religious preference and you've got this chip that they might consider the mark of the beast, but because of your principles and what you're actually doing, it far outweighs what their perception is of reality. So I think that people are judged, they should be judged upon the, what they actually do, not what they say. The media is so good with that.
Of course, of course. And it's in no way that I'm really like anti-military. I think our soldiers are heroes. I think they're doing brilliant jobs. In fact, I built
Right.
my entire career off kind of war correspondence or conflict correspondence. That's when I started for National Geographic. I did a lot of kind of conflict stories. So I spent quite a bit of time with the military, and those guys and gals are incredibly brilliant people. The problem, though, is that I really don't want to risk their lives. I just think their lives are too precious. I'm not sure of whatever we're trying to do in some of these places is really ultimately what we're trying to do is enable the security of America. But the real security is that we have about 12, 13,000 Americans dying every day here from various diseases, including aging. Well, that's much more than any war we're going through. So why don't we take a huge amount of this money from the military industrial complex and spend it on, healthcare, on science. And when I say healthcare, I don't mean let's spend on healthcare. I mean, let's spend it at the universities, in the hospitals, doing the research, because we can cure cancer. We can create robotic hearts that eliminate heart disease. We can have new types of stem cell technology that literally reverse some of the diseases we have. We just need to spend the resources. The question of curing diseases is not a matter of whether it can be done. It's a matter of when. Just like polio and some of these other measles, some of these other things, we took them out because we spent enough resources. We have the scientists here in America. We just got to give them the resources and the money. And, unfortunately, that comes from the government. The government has to take the lead there. I wish private companies would do it, but generally speaking, it doesn't make entirely economic sense. So the government needs to stand up and take a lead there and say, we're going to actually have a real war on cancer. We're going to wipe cancer out in the next 10 years. That's a goal of this nation. Sort of like we had a goal to go to Mars. To go to the moon, and hopefully soon to Mars.
Right, absolutely. And it looks like there's a good possibility that's going to happen. It would be nice if that was privatized. Hopefully you do make it into presidency, and then you can privatize spaceflight and put some money out there. That'd be incredible.
Oh yeah, I mean, space travel is one of our main tenets. In fact, the Transhumanist Bill of Rights, it was one of the 6 rights, which is that basically we feel that from an existential point of view, frankly, we actually deal with quite a lot of risk on our planet. We deal with asteroids, we deal with diseases. We have 25,000 nuclear arms on the planet still. We really should have a lot more space travel in our future, not only because it's super cool, not only because it's super interesting, but because we actually should have some of us off the planet in case the rest of us do something really stupid. And, there is a probability that we could do something really stupid. So it's always nice to have a bunch of people out into space in case the human race does, go the way of the dinosaurs.
Certainly. And you've met some really cool people also on your tour. I know you met John McAfee, and what's he like? He seems like a really interesting character.
Yeah, meeting John McAfee was awesome, actually. I wasn't really sure about it at first. I know he was a wild. The thing is, you hear these rumors, probably like people hear rumors of me and stuff like that. And, he's got this chip and he's like the cyborg and evil. Until they really meet you in person, they realize you're just hopefully a nice guy. You got a family, all these other things. Well, John McAfee was very similar to that, except, yes, he's eccentric, but he's also incredibly intelligent. I got to say, he's one of the very first people I've met in many years that I was really inspired by. His mind goes 100 miles per hour. And sure, a lot of those ideas don't appeal to me, but every now and then he throws in this bomb and you're like, I'm going to spend at least the next 2 days thinking about that idea. And that was what I really enjoyed about meeting with him, is that he gave me a whole bunch of new ideas to think about. And of course, he's such an expert in cybersecurity, which I'm not. So that gave me a whole new bunch of ideas about platforms and stuff like that. So, we think very differently. He's not concerned about aging. He thinks death is a good thing. But outside of that, we seem to agree on a lot of things because, to some extent, we both have some, libertarian leanings. And so I had a really good time hanging out with him. I had a nice long dinner with him. And then the next day we had a kind of long conversation over a couple coffees.
He seems like a real cool guy. I saw a commercial that he did a while back where he basically, he was talking about how the software that he originally created, the government took over, and now it's just you don't want anything to do with it. But yeah, just a real eccentric character. Hopefully, we'll have the opportunity to speak with him sometime. But when you went out and did that tour at the cryonics lab, Alcor, what was that like? That's incredible.
Well, yeah, and that was weird for me too, because you hear about cryonics, and cryonics is where you freeze people that have died. And in hopes to bring them back in 50 years. The Alcor people and the cryonicist would not say that they're dead. They'd say this is emergency medicine. They have not actually, dead is like you've been disintegrated. You know what I mean? You can't be brought back in some way. But if your body is there, it's really just a matter of finding rehabilitating that body, reanimating that body is the terminology they use. And I got to be honest, I agree with the lingo. I agree that if you can bring them back in 100 years, and you probably will be able to bring them back in 100 years. I mean, they've had some tests on animals and stuff like this that have shown some success. then it really is emergency medicine. People haven't died. One of the most interesting things about the last 10 or 20 years is that our perspective of death has changed. We used to say that death was heart dead. You know, your heart stopped beating, the guy's dead. Then we used to say, well, no, now it's brain dead. There's no more brain waves going on. Now we don't say any of that because we can have brain dead people, heart dead people, we can have cold people and still be able to bring them back to life. There's a University of Pittsburgh is running this program where they put saline solution in people that have been brought in the emergency center with like 5 or 6 bullet wounds to the chest. And they literally keep these people dead. They purposely kill them. And then they work on them when they're dead. Because if to work on someone when they're alive, you're just kind of worrying about all the blood flowing everywhere. It's a big mess. If you can just work on them when they're dead and you don't worry about all that, you can concentrate on what you're actually doing. They run the solution through them and then they slowly bring them back to life. And they can already do this for 4 hours, keep somebody literally dead for 4 hours. Well, that's this year. What's next year? Maybe 8 hours. What's the year after that? Well, maybe a full day. And eventually it's going to be like 5 days, 10 days, 20 days. So cryonics is sort of that idea. The saline solution is quite a bit different, but it's still this idea of preserving the body, knowing that somehow in the future you're going to have the medical know-how to bring back, to reanimate these people. And so when I went to Alcor, which is pretty much the largest facility in the world, or one of them, for freezing people, I was amazed because I've been writing about it for years, but until you actually see these kind of giant, metal canisters with people inside them, you don't realize that this is a real science. I was also really impressed that it wasn't like some garage operation. It was a major, major facility, many thousands of square feet, very clean. There was, secretaries. There was like obviously a bunch of laboratories, research places, and also there was a number of surgical offices where they do things because sometimes people don't want to have their body frozen; they just want to have their head frozen. So they have to decapitate the person after they're dead, and of course that requires surgery and stuff like that. And it's a lot cheaper just to freeze your head because by the time people come back in 50 years, honestly, in 50 years I'd be surprised if at least half our body is robots. We're definitely going to be half robots by 50 years from now. In 10 years' time, they're going to have an arm that's probably the equivalent of your arm. In 20 years' time, you're going to have an arm that is so much better than your biological arm, it's going to blow you away. Like I said, these war veterans that are coming back are already getting bionic limbs that are tied to their neural system that can grab a beer by thinking about it. So it's not like we're talking science fiction. It's just improving these things. It's sort of like when the car first came out. And then all of a sudden we got race cars, and then all of a sudden we got, so the evolution is going to happen. And the same thing with robotic eyes. There's 6 major companies right now I know of that are working on the robotic eye. And a lot of people think it's like $1 trillion industry because the robotic eye can function in a lot of different ways. And you always can take one out and still have a normal one. So you're not like too worried about it. The new robotic eyes look basically like the human eye. It's almost, you can't really distinguish that you have a robotic eye. Except they tied your optic nerve and they will be able to stream the internet. They'll be able to stream the entertainment. I'll be able to do this entire interview without an iPad, just my Skyping right through my eye. And you're going to be able to do things like see, 10 times as far or 10 times as close. You'll be able to see the germs on your partner. Maybe you'll be able to see poisonous gases for a father like me with 2 young children. That's actually quite important. So these are some of the things that are coming through the pipeline. And I'm really excited about it because I think in 50 years' time, you might not need a head. You might not need a real body. You're just going to need your head, and you're going to be able to put it onto something else that can support that. And again, it's 50 years' time. You really have to look back and say, well, how far have we come 50 years? Actually, it's been a huge amount of time.
Well, that's like plug and play stuff. It reminds me of the cartoon series Futurama, where you've got all those famous heads that, you've got the head of Einstein, and yeah, that's some neat stuff. And I wouldn't doubt it. Another thing too is if the technology is going to get that advanced, they could probably just use contacts. I've seen a lot of TV series out recently, like the new Minority Report TV show, where they've got these contacts that work. They work for the Federal Bureau of Investigations. They can zoom in, zoom out, facial recognition. It's pretty cool stuff. So it's amazing, and where it's going is incredible. It reminds me of a few of the recent movies that have came out. Lucy is one of them. Transcendence is another one, where they get connected to this singularity, and then they just go way above and beyond what most people could even fathom in thought. So let me ask you this: do you think that the singularity that Ray Kurzweil talks about, 2045, where basically man becomes obsolete, what is your thought on that?
Well, I think I'm a little bit ahead of him. I think it's about 2040, based on kind of computing power and what's happening. Um, it's really interesting. Like, a lot of people don't realize how fast the growth of these things are. Um, I was in a Newsweek article last week where I'd said, well, I know people are working on AI, and they would like to. I had challenged IBM's Watson to a debate. IBM's Watson won Jeopardy and all these other things. He's a very super smart supercomputer, and
Right.
IBM's Watson said no. But the reality is, in probably 4 years, he would be able to carry on a normal conversation and talk about policy. And so now I've heard there are a number of people that would like to run, their computers for the president, just because it's a funny thing to do. Now, in 2020, no one's going to be able to make sense of it. It's not going to be like it's a viable candidate, but you're going to have such interesting moments when you're listening to these machines that are very, very intellectual and probably offer some real insight. But of course, by 2028, now 12 years down the road, how much further or along will they be? Well, clearly they'll probably be as smart as us by that point. And the question is, do we allow them to become that smart? Because that's a whole different, that's a very dangerous thing, I would say, to have another species on the planet that's as smart as us. But that's how quick these things are transitioning. That's how quick they're going to go. By the next election cycle, you might be able to incorporate them into some debate where you start really asking these deeper questions like, wow, robots really are here and they really are taking all the jobs. And what are some of the, the future? What is the future of robots? Can we marry them? Or do we get write-offs when we marry them? These kinds of things. I mean, it gets crazy. In fact, that's part of what the Transhumanist Bill of Rights was about. Was it was trying to establish the fact that in about 10 years here, we're going to have numerous different kind of living creatures that might not necessarily be humans anymore, but also might be very sapient and very intellectual. Already we have people that are kind of trying to grow tail or trying to splice DNA into their skin so they can go out in the sun and make energy without eating. I mean, what do we call people like that have plant DNA spliced into their skin? And do they have the same type of rights as us? Well, probably they will, but what about an artificial intelligence? Can we torture an artificial intelligence if it does something wrong? Can you abuse a robot? These are all different kinds of civil rights that nobody has been discussing. The United Nations wrote, their Universal Declaration of Human Rights, I think 1948. So I think that's like 65 years ago. And, the things they mention in that have nothing to do with how fast technology has grown. So the Transhumanist Bill of Rights is really trying to say, I think you need to supplement your own Bill of Rights, because here in about 5 or 10 years, you're going to be stuck with designer babies who have augmented their intelligence and now are 25% higher IQ than any of us have ever been, including Einstein. How do you deal with that? Do those require any kind of regulations? Do they require any rules? What if the poor people don't have access to it? I mean, we need a Transhumanist Bill of Rights for a number of reasons. It's not just to monitor artificial intelligence. It's to make sure that we don't create a dystopia society, on planet Earth. So a lot of these crazy things are going to be happening in the future. And I think a huge amount of people just don't realize how quickly it's coming. I would not be surprised if in 2 to 3 years, a huge amount of people have this, because the chip, it's so functional to go to Starbucks and go bloop and not have a wallet. You never lose your wallet again. Your kids don't take your keys. You know what I mean? Like, all this
Does it
stuff
freak
becomes
people out when you do that?
Totally. It totally does, because they're like, if they're religious, they say, this is the mark of the beast. I don't know how we got this crazy idea that these chips are the size of a grain of rice. I
Do you
mean,
ever debate with people? Like, I'm sorry to interrupt, but do people
no.
ever like just jump on you and be like, "Look, man, you're going to hell"? They ever get on your
Oh, no, of
case?
course, of course. I mean, I have a huge amount. I get called the Antichrist like a couple thousand times, definitely in this campaign, because here I am promoting the merging of humans with machines for the glory of the species, and that's blasphemy when you actually look at biblical text. But actually, if you take a step back and leave the Bible out of it, what I'm trying to do is improve people's health for their own well-being, so that they don't have to lose a child to leukemia, or they don't have to lose a parent to Alzheimer's. We're talking about love and family, and and country. I mean, so the things transhumanists are striving for are very much at the core of kind of what America really is, using science and innovation to make this country a better place and keeping our families together. So I try to always point that out to them rather than this mark of the beast. Hollywood has had, unfortunately, an overwhelming influence. Like whenever you talk about artificial intelligence, you think of Terminator, you think of Skynet. Well, there's
You know,
other
there is a real
alternatives too.
Skynet.
Yeah, no, I've heard of that too. And the truth of the matter is that could happen, but it could also lead to have a machine that's an AI that solves all the environmental problems that we've ever had through a bunch of calculations. So we don't even need to do anything anymore, and we could fix the planet or something like that. This is the benefit of AI. We have to kind of balance both sides and say, well, yes, I'm worried about it, but at the same time, what if it does, something really good for our species?
There's certainly both possibilities, and it seems like you're answering a lot of the questions that I was going to ask in the way that you're speaking. I mean, I was going to bring up Skynet and a Terminator type possibility. A lot of times the movies that you watch in Hollywood, they'll take just little bits and pieces of something that's actually out there and glorify it, and then you get the people out there and they say, oh my goodness, that's actually going to happen. And then people say, well, it happened in the movie, so it's not going to happen. It's impossible. So there's both sides of everything. And I appreciate that. But I love what you're doing and the way that you're talking about really just trying to better people, the human race. And, what does your family think about what you're doing?
Well, when I told my wife I was going to run for, the presidency, she really, it's not that she didn't take it seriously, but she wasn't sure what would happen. And I wasn't sure what would happen either. I mean, when you declare yourself a transhumanist and for a small transhumanist party, what are your chances? Well, they're pretty slim, and they're still pretty slim. But there's been a real media outreach. There's been a media boom to what I'm doing, and that has changed the dynamics because when we thought we would drive a bus across the country, we weren't sure if anyone would show up, but we were, everywhere we went, people showed up to hear and to have parties and to throw things, throw different kinds of events. And so it was a lot more. My wife is much more on board now that she's seeing a consistent stream of news and that the movement has grown because of this, that science and technology have actually benefited from this kind of wacky idea of running for the presidency as a transhumanist. Now, it may not be wacky in 8 or 12 years, but it's pretty wacky right now because, as you said, most of my job is convincing people that we actually even should embrace this kind of technology and science. I think in 10 or 12 years, most of us will have already done that. And then it'll be really like, well, who are the natural leaders to help us even do it more? And, hopefully that's a point when maybe I will run again and have a much better chance of what I'm doing.
Right. And yeah, I mean, the more you get this information out there, it's just going to be like a snowball effect. And, hopefully within the next few years that there could be tens of millions of people that know about what you're doing, and it could go leaps and bounds. And I've got that brings me to the next thing too, with what you're doing. I mean, have you met some people in some really high places that are for the transhuman movement as well?
Yes, I have. But unfortunately, the people in really high places are kind of, they're a little bit sketchy. It's sort of like the chip in your arm, I think, or in your hand. A lot of people, they understand the practicality, they understand it's functional, but at the same time, it's like they just branding. They just don't want to get recognized as somebody who's too fringe. And I'm obviously a fringe character when you look at the mainstream people. I try to be normal. I try to dress nice, and I try to have them show my family, and I'm got kids, and then I have I've done well in business and stuff like that. But we're still pretty fringe. But I think increasingly, like you heard recently, Mark Zuckerberg at Facebook talk about the life extension industry and how that's very important. And of course, you have the Singularity University, Peter Diamandis, some of these people that are actively seeking transhumanist technologies, and of course, the Google company is I'd say half of them are transhumanists. They might all be closet transhumanists. They might not say that openly, but they actively are pursuing a life that's imbued with technology, and it's not just imbued with technology. It's what we call techno-optimism. They are just optimistic about using technology in their lives in every single way. And that's really been what I'm about too, is just saying, historically speaking, anytime you have used technology in your lives, people's, worlds have improved. And Even the World Bank recently reported saying, why has the standard of life for every single person on the planet gone up? Well, it's because of science and technology. It's really not because of anything else. It's not because there's less dictators and things like that. It's just because there's more science, there's more technology, there's more vaccines. People can get to places quicker because cars are available. They have cell phones to call when they have emergencies. It doesn't matter if you're living in a mud hut in Africa or you're living in New York City. Life has improved for whoever you are through science and technology. So generally speaking, it's been very positive for the human race in raising the standard of living. Doesn't mean equality has not been growing separately in different directions, but the standard of living for people has definitely improved.
Well, and that brings me to the next question. Do you see multiple societies being spawned from this movement?
That's pretty much the number one question I always get. I think a lot of people worry, and I'm not sure if it's Hollywood, but they worry about the dystopic future because the rich have access to radical technologies like augmenting their intelligence, and the poor just kind of get left behind. Historically speaking, though, that might have been the case. In the robber barons or the super rich people, the J.P. Morgans, whatever, in the 1900s and whatnot, have they weren't very nice to labor people and to the normal world. They really just took their wealth and used it for themselves. But the Bill Gates of the world, they're taking all their wealth and spending it on trying to fix the problems of the world. That's really been their main goal. Most of the young billionaires out there have become somewhat humanitarian, at least more than they've ever been before. And so they end up spending a lot of money to make the world a better place. I can't imagine, for example, Mark Zuckerberg or Elon Musk taking the technology and running off with it. If they did, we'd just stop using Facebook and be so pissed off. And that wouldn't help them. But I think they're just generally better people. Democracy has kind of caught hold into the younger generation. So, while I'm not saying it's perfect, I do believe that the people that are inventing this technology, that control this technology, the super elite, they're not planning on leaving the rest of us behind. I'm not one of them, by the way. I'm not super rich, so I don't want to be left behind. But I don't think they're going to do that. I think they're going to probably continue their capitalistic ways, try to make money on it, but also share it and be generous. As a politician, or one that's aspiring to be, we have policies in effect that would say, for example, with designer babies and augmenting intelligence, if it costs too much to augment one's intelligence, I would advocate for the government to step in and give grants or mandate it so that anyone that wanted to improve their intelligence through genetic editing would have it, no matter if the poorest people in America. Because I can't think of anything worse than having a really rich person be able to make their children smarter, and then a poor person not be able to do that, and this equality thing get even worse. So, I would, as a politician, I would step in, lean left, and say, we're going to make this across the board available to everyone that wants it, because the last thing we want to do is create a society that's already got more inequality issues.
Right. Now, also, this may sound kind of like a stupid question, so I want to word it the right way because I know what an atheist is. So I'm not asking if you believe in God, but some atheists don't really necessarily know what consciousness is, what makes them animated. Some, think it's just their DNA or whatever. So, but everybody has a different opinion on things. So, if like you went to that cryogenics lab and you said that there are these bodies that were basically enclosed and the people there were able to put a really cool lingo or wordage or verbiage, to say, okay, well, they're not really dead because there's still physical mass there. So, I mean, let's say that 50 years from now, if you take somebody's blood, even if you just have one drop of their blood, you can literally clone it to make a person out of that, or one cell or something like that, make an entire person. So when they are created as a whole, I mean, is that the same person? Is that the same essence? I mean, what do you really think is, and this is like three questions in one here, but what do you really think you are?
Well, I think you're your memories to begin with. I think that's so critical. So, the biggest problem with cryonics right now is that no one's really been certain so far that when you bring back someone, they're gonna their memories, their brain is going to be intact. They might be able to think, but if they lost their memories, then they're just a physical body. And well, that's still lovable, if you're the family member. I think them remembering you is critical. So for me, a huge part of who we are is this ability to remember and and know that I went through that. That was my history. That's what made me who I am. So I think that's one thing that's critical. But I think as you get into the future, we think of our minds as kind of like thinking. Just it's a brain. It does the dreams when it sleeps. It just thinks. It can be reasonable. It can be irrational. Whatever it wants to be. In the future, though, like literally within 15 years, we're gonna have all these little bots inside that are connecting to the internet. We already, Obama already gave $70 million to DARPA to be treating the war veterans that come out for their PTSD. I mean, we're going to cure depression probably within 5 to 7 years, potentially through brain implants. That's what the money was for. Literally implants that go inside your brain that sense this is where you get depressed. This is where you stimulate and send little voltage things, and voila, you're better. We already have 500,000 chips in people's heads. Different, most of it is to cure deafness, but some of it is for Alzheimer's, some of it is for epilepsy. So brain implants or some type of brain wave technology is going to change how we think, because we're going to be stimulating it all the time with different types of things. Like I've written an article recently for my column at Vice where it's, the drug lords of the future are not looking at plants. They're looking at coders. They're looking at software developers. They're looking at chips inside and giving you the right coding that gives you exactly the brain signals that makes you feel like, this is it. They're going to have the best coders in the world. And that's the future of drugs. And not the future of like going out in the forest and having a plant, having an overdose. And the same thing, of course, with a chip implant. You never would overdose because you'd be able to stop it. Well, I mean, maybe somebody hacked it. Now, this is where you get interesting. But generally speaking, you have a lot more control over the high you have. And again, it's not just, this can be used to make you feel like for obese people, like, or people that don't, or overeaters, you can make them feel like they're satiated. They don't want to eat anymore. I mean, there's going to be all sorts of different types of things we can do with our body just by having these brain implants and make us much healthier. And so I'm a big believer when you talk about consciousness, it's all brain waves. Memories have to be intact in order to remember who you are, but new stimuli is going to come through the form of technology that's going to enhance us dramatically and make us sort of like super beings. And it's going to even improve our moral choices. I've written about, there was that airline pilot who crashed the airplane in Germany and he killed all 150 people. Apparently, he committed suicide as the captain. Well, I think we're going to have chips in place someday that would not allow us to do that, or that might monitor authorities if somebody was having issues like that. And certainly if you're an airline pilot, you shouldn't have the ability to want to commit suicide. There should be some type of fail-safe system that says, I'm so sorry, you're in charge of people. You can't just take their lives at you because you have emotional issues. So this is also the future, and that gets into kind of a questionable area of surveillance and whatnot. But, our consciousness is what it is. We want to become superhumans. We want to become more intellectual and have more capacity for thinking. We want to be interconnected to the internet. We want to be able to think, you and I. I mean, right now we're doing it physically through like this screen. But, I would say in 10 or 15 years, we're definitely not going to be doing it through outside things. Already in a few years, it's going to be probably through holographic imaging. So stuff like that, they already have today. So where is consciousness going? Well, it's going to become whatever it is now with memories tied in with huge amounts of amazing tech that is, kind of stimulating us through many different ways.
And I think of that TV series. It didn't last very long. It was unfortunate. It was called Caprica on the Sci-Fi Channel. And I remember that guy loses one of the main characters. He's absolutely brilliant. And, this is like the prequel to the Cylons of Battlestar Galactica. And basically, his daughter dies, and he is at the cutting edge of artificial intelligence and such. And he takes all of her memories and downloads it and creates an avatar. And I remember like watching this episode where he creates her and he goes in and talks to her, and she's like freaked out because she's not all there. It's like there's about 85% of her memories or something. And so it's almost like she's being tortured, because it's not really her. So does that kind of stuff freak you out? I mean, if let's say you get the opportunity, you're 90 years old and the technologies aren't as advanced as you're hoping they're going to be, and many people are saying they're going to be. So you're on death's bed and you have the opportunity to download your consciousness into a computer. Would you do it? And would you worry that maybe it's not going to work and you're going to be stuck in some type of like torture chamber or something?
Well, I would definitely do the uploading thing anyways, because I think it's awesome. I think you have to have some fail safes in there about the torturing thing. I do worry about that. I think that could be one way when they talk about the biblical, eternal hell. There could be methods that you keep somebody alive permanently in torture mode, and
Right.
that could be terrible. That could be terrible. So far it's like impossible to do, but that is definitely a method that could someone could achieve technologically. But I still would do it because I think life will work itself out. I think we just need to be very cautious with some of this stuff. I don't think you need to be cautious with a bionic arm. Put it on, take it off, whatever. Fix it, get a new one. But I think the idea of uploading your mind, it's the only mind you got. If you blow it, then you're in trouble. So you better do it right, and it better not go wrong, and you better be you when you arrive on the other side. So you know, I think we're going to get to a point when we've done that a gazillion times with you know through algorithms and maybe with animals or whatever we're going to have to do to make sure this works. But I think eventually, and I'm not a big fan of the animal thing, but I think we'll have AIs that we can do it, we can simulate it a gazillion times and make sure it actually works. And then some people will be some of the very first ones to volunteer, just like we have biohackers now that are starting to line up to put chips in their head to be the very first people to commune with artificial intelligences that already exist. We have very rudimentary AIs that are out there, but we do have ones that you can already commune with to some extent, and they want to be able to do that telepathically with these chips in their head. So there's no more voice. It's just they think thoughts to the machine thinks thoughts back to them. And these are people literally trying to do this, literally lining up doctors in Europe right now to do this.
Wow, I just had an amazing thought there when you said that. Imagine being able to, implant something or plug into something, and then if you want to transfer your consciousness or some part of yourself into a satellite that's orbiting Pluto, you could transfer your vision to there, and you're actually looking at Pluto like a first person. That's pretty neat stuff, I tell you. No, let
Yeah,
me,
yeah. And I think with mind uploading, that's going to be one of the great things is the very first thing everyone says when they mind upload, the very first thing we're all going to do is you upload your mind. Well, then you create your clone because at least now there's two of you in case something goes wrong and the other one can help you. If you're being tortured forever, like, come save me. So, it gets really kind of weird philosophically, but then you're like, well, do I want my clone out there? But of course, from the moment it enters into this, you have two of you, it's not going to be the same person because it already starts having different experiences. So very simple, very quickly becomes more like a twin brother. Well, anyways, there are all these kind of strange ideas like that. But philosophically, the uploading thing is so fun to think about because there's a gazillion possibilities, and it makes it pretty wondrous.
Yeah, the Lawnmower Man, is the
Yeah,
movie that comes to
totally.
mind for sure. And that I know that came out 20 something years ago. Incredible movie. So
Of
we
course.
we've got about 10 minutes left, and I know this is like the third interview that you've done today. So I just once again really appreciate you getting on here. So you're a super busy guy, a lot going on, and good luck too with your campaign. I hope that it brings a lot of publicity to you, and certainly the candidates that are out there on the stage now that are getting the majority of the mainstream news. Wow, man, what a joke! What
Well,
a
it
joke!
has been unbelievable. I was just talking today in an interview saying that what I think, everyone's saying that the candidates are different this year. And I'm like, that's true. But I think another thing that's happened is that the media is quite different. In 4 years' time, the media has changed substantially. More and more of the media has become sensationalistic. More of the media has become more like Fox News. And in order to keep up with your ad sales and stuff like that, you need to have these like crazy things happening. And so I've been watching this unfold, saying yes, we have characters for running for president right now, but we also have media just loving it and having higher ad sales than ever, and saying, hey, the more dramatic you can be, the more sensational. So unfortunately, we have to remember this is still the presidency of the United States. It's a very serious job. You're still in charge of 8 or 9 thousand nuclear missiles just in America alone. So and a bunch of keeping the world running smoothly as well as feeding your own people. So uh, it is a little bit clown-like the entire process this time around, but maybe that's just the nature of how media is. It becomes a bit more like that, I suppose.
Yeah, it's more extreme every year.
Yeah.
It's transhuman movement is amazing, but now it's the transgender push in the media. I mean, obviously with what's his name? I can't remember. Jenner, is that right?
Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah.
so regardless, I mean, whatever somebody wants to do, that's fine. But that is kind of the way things are going. But so let's say that you make presidency. What are you going to do? Break it down real quick for us, and how are you going to save America and really kind of bring it back to the cutting edge of what it used to be?
Yeah. So sorry again because I'm sick, everyone. But yeah. So my first 100 days in office would be really simple. We would allocate $1 trillion to conquering diseases and death, and it would just be like wipe out these things. Ebola should be wiped out. I mean, cancer, all these other things. Let the government take a stand, and not necessarily the government do the work, but let the government just start throwing money at universities, at private companies that have a real, platforms for conquering the things that make us die and make us unhealthy. And I think what a lot of people don't realize is this has some real ramifications in the long term. If you can get a 70-year-old to feel like he's 60 and want to continue working, that will also help the economy. If you can do things like reverse aging, now, most scientists think we're going to be able to reverse aging within 20 or 25 years. Not most scientists. Let me say that again. There's a number of scientists, a growing number, that think through genetic editing and stuff like that, we're going to be able to stop aging and probably reverse it. We've had some success with this in mice. So I would spend a huge amount of government resources on some of the science. It doesn't mean I would change the economy. It doesn't mean I do. I'm not that political. I would try to the greater good for everyone else. Like whatever works economically for the most amount of people in America, that's what I would do. Whatever works socially for the most amount of people, that's what I would do. But when it comes down to life extension science and medicine, this is when I would just spend most of my time and effort really trying to get it so that this country can create a scientific industrial complex instead of a military industrial complex. America spends 20% of its GDP on bombs, on defense, on fighting wars, and we spend 2% on science. 2%. That's 10 times more on bombs. That number is insane. It's a tragedy. So, I would just spend a lot more money on science. The other thing I would do is I would probably try to empty a lot of the prisons. We spend 4 times the amount of money in this country on prison systems than we do on education. That's, again, a giant tragedy. I think nonviolent offenders need to be monitored through some type of technology, either through chipping or through just wearing bracelets or through drone technology, even better, since drone technology has become so affordable, and let the nonviolent offenders out and get them back to working so they can pay taxes instead of taxpayers paying for them to be holed up in these places where they just become even they become more criminal like. So those are some of the main things I do. And of course, one of the main things of my campaign is that I would make college entirely free. And I would also like to make it so that college becomes something that's mandatory. What a lot of people don't realize is that when we created the laws for, in America, everyone needs to go to high school. Basically, the laws say you have to be 17 or 18 before you can stop going to high school. We created most of those laws in the early 60s when people's lifespans were about 63 years old. That's how long people were living on average. Now the average lifespan is like 85, and very soon it's going to be like to 100 here in about 10 or 20 years. And yet, despite that almost doubling in lifespan, we haven't changed how long our educational periods are. We would have a lot less crime in this country and a lot more prosperity if people were to become more educated. But we have to change the culture and make it sell this idea that we can become an educated scientific nation. We just need to put our foot down and say, well, yeah, everyone's going to get a college degree and everyone's going to have access to free PhDs. If they want a second or third PhD, the government's going to pay for it. So these are some of the main platforms that I would like to do. I know they're a bit stringent. They're a bit, people are like, oh, it sounds too, a little too over the top. But you have to look 10 years into the future and say, well, China's kicking our butt. India might be kicking our butt too. These are countries that are emerging, that are really starting to grab hold of what it means to be a superpower. if America wants to stay ahead, it's going to have to do something more dramatic than what it's doing right now. It can't just keep shopping at Walmarts and thinking this is what the American dream is. The American dream is something that has to be crafted. And we need to take our children and really kind of craft it in them and say, to be an American is to be someone that's really brilliant and scientifically inclined and that strives for innovation and embraces this kind of innovation as a part of the American spirit. And if we can reach that, then I think we can create a nation that is truly wonderful and truly, admired throughout the world. And, it's just going to take sort of a hand that says it's more about science than it is about military. It's more about education than it is about crime. It's more about, the best in us than just shopping at Walmart.
Yeah, that was very eloquently put. I certainly appreciate that, Zoltan. And if you would, for our listeners, give them your websites, and if they want to donate or help with your candidacy right now, please give us an opportunity to do so.
Sure. Well, one thing we didn't talk about is I don't take campaign contributions. I'm a big believer that the campaign financing issues of this country are awful. So I made a symbolic stand not to take any contributions. So thankful for anyone who wants to do it. You can't do it, unfortunately. I mean it when I say we really need to change the way we fund candidates, because third-party candidates have not much of a voice because of the way our government has set up the campaign finance. So if you want to make any donations, you can donate to the Transhumanist Party, which is transhumanistparty.org. But personally, my campaign doesn't take any at all. But you can definitely support my website, spread on Twitter and Facebook and all those places. My campaign website is zoltanistvan.com. And if you want to learn about the Immortality Bus, which is just this funny, wacky thing, you can watch tons of videos. We've, had a huge amount of videos and TV coverage there. It's immortalitybus.com. And, it was a wacky tour, fun tour. We welcomed any American to come on board the bus. We never said no to anyone. So a whole bunch of strange people were on board, and we had a great long road trip for about 4 months through America.
Yeah, right on. So that's awesome. I wish you the very best, and please keep putting out this good information.